My name is Sean Dunn. I'm a senior product manager at Epic Games. My focus is on linear content, and USD kind of falls within that range. A bit of my background about me. So I've been in the industry for a very long time. Started in production. I worked at Alias Wavefront early days before they released Maya. I worked in production at Weta Digital for about 13 years. And then I worked at a company in China called Original Force, and now I'm at Epic Games. So USD, we're gonna talk a little bit about USD and USD in Unreal. So why USD? It's very, very short. Exporting USD, importing, and working with USD Unreal. So those are sort of the three ways we use, or you can use USD with Unreal, and chances are you'll be using a bunch of them in combination. Okay, so why USD? Hopefully everyone knows this already, but for me, there's three big pieces of this. It's a scene description that works between many applications. It's a scene description that multiple artists can work at the same time. Like I'm a big fan of parallel pipelines where you have all the departments working as closely as possible. The big one for me is it's a primary source of data. So meaning everyone is contributing to that single source so that when someone needs data, they are only getting it from that source. If you don't have that, it's really easy to diverge, and then stuff shows up in shots that shouldn't show up in shots, and people get really angry. So USD and Unreal, the big thing for us is it provides actually a really easy way to integrate Unreal into pipelines and workflows. We're trying to make Unreal or USD work really well in Unreal, so that if you have a USD pipeline, you can just try opening stuff, playing with it, looking at it, and there's you don't have to do a lot of pipelining and stuff necessarily just to try it. So then we're trying to allow different ways to work with USD, which is the import, export, and in engine, and we're continually improving the USD functionality. So if anyone here has been dealing with USD, it's quite a big topic and there's a lot to it. So we're in the process of slowly getting that integration into Unreal. Okay, so from an export standpoint, we're trying to support everything that you can export to USD. So being able to get out geometry, so static meshes, LODs, foliage, landscapes, materials, levels. With materials, it's more of like a baking process, so we're not actually getting at materials yet. Material X is coming. There's support in USD 5.1 for Material X as an import, but not related to USD yet. Okay, so the USD functionality is still to be developed. So this is a simple example of an asset in Unreal that we're going to export out. So it's just a matter of finding the asset, going and doing an export on it. I always choose USDA because I like to be able to look at the USD file itself and see what's going on, and oftentimes I'm doing manual edits and stuff for bigger processes. So you can choose the meters, so your scale. You can choose Z up or Y up. Unreal is Z up. You can use payload, which means that it'll kind of create a wrapper USD, and then the geometry information will be kept in the payload. And then you can bake materials. We give the option to what size you want to bake them at. Of course, if your materials in Unreal are small, like if they're 256, baking mode at 1K, it's not going to magically give you more. So once it's exported, then it's a matter of going into, well, in this case here, I'm just popping up OpenUSD View to take a look at the asset. I type really slow, as you can see. Yeah, so there it's exported. It's in USD View. You got at 1K, you're getting reasonably good textures. obviously, depending what you're going to be doing with it. And then if we take a look at the actual ASCII file that was exported out, then we can take a look at sort of a little bit of the structure. So you can see, like, when we write it out, we're breaking it out into sort of the pieces. We've got the asset information, the material information, because it's going out to payload. There's a payload file, which is just all the geometry information in there. And that also means that when you're managing your USD file, loading it, if you can have your payloads off, you're not forced to load it right away. So this is a second example, and this example here is got LODs. So you can see as I'm moving back and forth that the geometry is popping ever so slightly. So it's got LODs within it. So there's 4 within this one. So when we export this, we can have it export out all the individual LODs. LODs in USD are handled as variants, so they're not necessarily called LODs. So again, exporting it out as USD ASCII. You can choose ASCII or binary, so whichever one you choose. Again, I always go with ASCII because I'm always looking in the files, seeing what's going on. But for speed of load, then binary would be better. Now, when you are doing payloads, you can actually choose what payload you want. Like, do you want to write it out as USD ASCII or as a USDC? And then as far as the textures go, when you're exporting it, it'll depend on what your material structure is in Unreal, but we try to export out whatever channels that you've got in Unreal. We actually export out more channels than what USD will support. We do that based on the what's attached to the material. When you are exporting it out, you can manually choose the channels that you want, but it's just a bit more work. So we have it more automated. Now the thing is, if you have a 256 texture and a 2K texture and a 4K texture, when we write them out, if you choose 1K, then that's what you're getting, for all of them. So we don't have it dialed in that quite refined. So this is like a train going by. I'm like, wow, that's really loud. So yeah, this is again just popping into USD view so we can see it. The funny thing here was when I popped it into USD view, I was like, how do I actually switch the LODs? So I didn't switch them, so that's why I quickly jumped away from that. But again, going in just quickly, doing a look at the structure. Obviously, it's writing out more files. There is a payload file. The payload file has the geometry for all the LODs. And then again here, this is the material. You see there's a custom string Unreal material. So when we export out an asset, we will put the Unreal material as metadata on the USD asset. And when we bring it back in, I'll show it in a second, you can switch between that and the textures. So yeah, so there's the payload, which is a giant ASCII file. So now if I open this into the USD stage, then you get the, it does a pretty good job of exporting it out with the textures and whatnot. The funny thing here was I'm now looking for there's an LOD thing that shows up, and I'm going, man, where is it? Why can't I see it? And I'm like clicking everywhere, and that's why my mouse is moving so much. And all I need to do is click on the top name. I'll get there. It'll just be a couple more seconds. There we go. I caught up. So it actually will pull up and show you the LODs, so you can switch between them, the USD. And again, they're variants, but we tag them as that, and so then you can pop between them from for the different levels of geometry that you're working on. And then if we look at there's on the options here, we have the render context. So right now, the render context is set to Unreal, and that's where it's picking up the that custom string. So you can see it says, I apologize for the blurriness a bit. It's only 19 or HD resolution. But yeah, so it's reading that custom string, right? And if the material is in your project in Unreal, it'll automatically put it on the asset and display it. So then what I've done is here I'm changing to universal, and that's changing it to the context where it's using the baked out materials that you've written out. So it's using USD preview surface now, and the textures that were baked. But it's good. It's important to know that because like one of the nice things is if you are in a workflow where you're pulling stuff out of Unreal and sending it off, you can save it out and send something to Maya or Houdini USD View and have at least it looking very close as far as texture wise and stuff. But if you want to bring it back into Unreal, you can then still get the the Unreal materials back on it, even though it's going to be a USD file. Okay. So this is just now building on it. So you can do individual assets. So you can also do a complete level. So depending on how complex your level is, it'll export out everything. And so what we're doing here is when we export something like this, we actually look at the assets and we write out individual USD files for each asset. And then we have a level that collects them all and puts them in. So if on export, you had one of the tanks, if you had the tank in there 100 times, it's going to export it out once. And then the top level USD file is just going to point to the same reference file, X number of times. So we're trying to be reasonably smart in how we, write this information out. So yeah, so the difference here is, yeah, you're going to write out the level. You can choose to, if you have a level that has other levels in it, you can write all those out as sublevels. It's a regular train, apparently. I think it's about every 8 minutes. And so here's what the sort of the structure of the USD file. So you've got the individual meshes, that, you can see like the wooden pallet and the container and so on and so forth. So it writes them all out individually. And it does it, like it takes the directory structure that you've got in your content folder, and it's kind of uses that, as what the directories that it will create. So yeah, I can see, so those are the individual assets themselves. Now I didn't choose payload, so it's not writing out individual payloads for the assets. And again, like popping it open in USD View, so you can just see, what it looks like outside of the engine. Now, there's one thing, and I haven't, it was on an earlier slide, we talked about nanite. So if you're not familiar with nanite, nanite is new tech that came in 5.0, and it lets you bring in like incredibly high resolution assets, and it will present the asset back to you based on your camera position. So if you're really far away, it will be really low resolution. If you're really close, it'll be high, and it will even change the resolution of the surface as the surface is further from you. So if you have a really big surface, it's really far from you, then it'll be much lower res further away. So when you import geometry or load geometry in Unreal, or sorry, in USD, like you can bring it in and you can flag it as nanite. So you can either export it. If it's nanite, when you export it, it'll put information in the metadata that says it's nanite. Or if when you load it, it'll load in as nanite. So the thing that you may have noticed is that the jugs on the far edge there, they're more faceted. And the reason for that is they were flagged as nanite, and when it exported it out a slightly lower version. So if I didn't want that, I could just turn nanite off, and then it'll export them out as the full high res. Okay, so we support level sequence export. So if you've got characters, it'll write them out. You get the full skinning, blend shapes, all that stuff comes out. It'll write out the cameras that are part of that level sequence, any transform information, um, and you can also, if you've structured things properly, you can export out animation specifically, to a layer itself. So if I have a character that's animated, I can export that, just the animation out. So you can kind of use it as well, you can use USD as a way to store your individual animations for, for your shots and stuff like that. And then lights. Um, This is Slay, which is on the marketplace. So if you go on the marketplace, you can find this. It's an animated short that we had done, and it's a nice example of fairly complex environment with a bunch of shots that are happening in a sequence. And so you can choose this if you wanted to. I'm only exporting out one of the shots, but you could grab the entire sequence, the top level sequence, which has all the shots attached to it, and you can export all of it at the same time. And when that exports, so again, I'm only grabbing one shot, but if I grab the top level, it would be the same thing. So you're just going in and doing asset actions export. And when you, well, wait till the dialog box comes up. So, so now you have the level sequence has been added in there. And so you can, do things like, override frame ranges and whatnot. You can choose to export, subsequences as layers. You can export the level, so you don't have to export the level first. This will take it all with it. So you can export the level, and then once you're down to the level export, you're back to exporting, what we showed a couple minutes ago. Yeah, same, and going in and doing the material and stuff. Now, the landscape is something that in Unreal is defined by a height map. So if you are exporting landscape, it's just giving you baked geometry. And so if you are exporting out a really big landscape, then you're going to need to up the value there. But you have to be careful because you'll literally run out of memory if you're exporting it. So because it will generate gigabytes and gigabytes of data because it's got to turn it into actual geometry. But it's what's nice about it is that you can get out a landscape. So if you're passing that off to other DCCs, you have the ability to get that out. So when we export something like this out, it gets much more complex. So this is if I've exported out the entire sequence. So the sequence was called TF edit, and then you can see all the individual shots that are associated with it, and you can see that's sort of the structure there. And it's got all the animation in that top, all the cameras. So if I went through this file, it would be all the different cameras that it would be pointing to, and so that's. And then this is an individual shot. If you blinked, you missed it. There, I did it again. So this is going to be the exact same structure for the individual shot. And if you load just the individual shot, you'll get everything associated with it. If you load the TF edit, the top sequence, you'll get everything. Okay, so importing. So this is the nanite, one of the nanite things. If I'm importing geometry, there's a value you can set. There's two ways you can do it. You can either add some information to the USD file and have it tagged as nanite and give it I think it's a true or false. Or there's a setting in the USD stage window where you can have a threshold for the how many polygons. So anything above this number will automatically treat it as nanite. And then if you have cache geometry, so if you've cached geometry into USDC, then it'll import that as well. And then so materials, it'll bring in USD preview surface and materials and all the textures associated with it. And there's limited MDL support right now, so it will bring them in, but it's not super robust. And I mentioned earlier, Material X is, it's coming, but we haven't written it into the USD stuff yet. So, skeletons, if we import them, it'll import them, skeletal meshes and skeletons, brings in the skinning, blend shapes. We can bring in animation, so it'll bring in transform, joint, or camera animation. And 5.1, we've got groom support. And so if you have a character defined in USD that has a groom, it will import it as USD. It will import it as a geometry cache into Unreal. Eventually, we're looking at trying to support grooms in USD itself, so that I could open up, a USD file in the USD stage, and then you could have, the hair interaction and whatnot. But that's a definite future thing. At this point, it's really just an import into Unreal, turning it into a U asset. Cameras, so we support, camera motion, obviously, and then so yeah, so focal length, focus distance, f-stop. There's limitations. So not all USD attributes are handled at this point. Some of them there isn't a one-to-one, so some of them we don't have the same attributes internally. So lights, we bring in lights. Lights, I'd say, are the trickiest thing. Like there are definitions as far as lights, but coming from different applications, they all mean very different things. There's a number of light types like cylinder mesh that we don't support because there isn't anything internal to Unreal that would match up to it. But yeah, lights, it's sort of, I think as an industry, we need to figure out better light transport, values and stuff. And then point instancers. So if you have a point instancer, we'll bring it in. So if you have a point instancer, and let's say it's a point instancer for a tree, and then you have a point instancer that's a child of the tree, so that for the leaves. So if you have a point instancer that's pointing to point instancers, it's hard to say that. But we can handle that, but we have to bake the second, like when you go into a level, we bake that as a static mesh, because we can't carry, like there's no construct in Unreal that is like an instancer pointing to an instancer pointing to an instancer. Going? Oh, there. Okay, so this is just going through some of the import stuff. So importing the geometry. This is again a good example. Like this has been brought into a fresh Unreal. There are no materials in there, so obviously it's not going to have anything on it. So that's when you change the render context to universal, and then when you do that, you're getting the textures showing up. When it imports it in, it obviously turns it into a static mesh. It comes in with the material instance and pops it into whatever folder you've chosen within the content browser to bring it in. So there's the import. Then it'll show you here's all the things that you want to import, and there's I'm going to turn it off here, but the actor. So if you turn off actor, when you import it, it imports it, but it imports it straight to the content browser, and so it's not going to show up in the level that I'm looking at. So I'm bringing in the render context is going to be universal. If there's an Unreal attribute on it pointing to the material, it will, if that material exists, it would bring it in and then just have that material apply to it. Yeah, and then if there's LODs. And so yeah, once it's imported, it disappears, but it's in the US, like the USD import folder is the folder that I chose. So it'll have the asset in there. And so if you have assets that are placed in certain locations and you want them to be there, then you want to turn on the actor so that it then will put it in the outliner and put it, like, leave it in that position. It's more important with levels when you have lots of assets that you're bringing in. And so this is bringing in the LOD asset. So again, if the USD is structured correctly, when we read it in, if there are LOD variants in it, it will bring it in and put it into the LOD chain within Unreal. And so this one, because I cheated by exporting it, we put it in the right USD state. So bring it back in, it works. So once we import, and then the thing to note, like if you're importing right now, whatever's in the USD stage window, you're getting it all, right? So if you're wanting to only import sections, then it's you have to kind of structure your USD so that you can then only load the bit you want and only import that bit. Because if not, like I said, it'll import whatever's there. Yeah, we haven't gone down the road of looking at like only import what's selected, in the viewport, let's say, if you're looking at it. So that might come in the future, but not at this point. So yeah, so then it shows you the static meshes and the other materials that were on it, but yeah, all the textures, and the static mesh will have the LOD stack within it. There you can see it jumping between the LODs. Okay, so then this is bringing in a level. If I load in a level, this is where I want to have actors turned on. If I want to maintain, the position of all the assets. Again, render context is set to Unreal right now, which obviously there's no Unreal materials for them. And then it's just a matter of changing the context. So we've got it. And there's other things that we support there, like there's purposes. So if you have render purposes or render purpose proxy, like those things are all supported as well. Yeah, so you got the individual assets showing up in USD. So you can see there, like, as I load something in to the USD stage, I can access those things. I can move them around. I can, change the position. In this case here, I'm trying to ingest it into Unreal because I want everything in Unreal. I'm going to choose actors, and then once I hit import, then they'll still be sitting there, and I'll have everything in the content browser. Yeah, so those are all the individual assets that were part of that, and it's all U assets now. So if you're working with USD files and your end result is going to be coming out of Unreal, it's easy to then pull whatever data is coming from USD into Unreal, and you have and in this case here, this is only the geometry and stuff, but I'll show you an example with the animation and whatnot. Yeah, so this is pulling in the one of the shots from Slay that I'd written out, so you can see that there's the preview is coming from there was lights that were exported to USD, so this has come in with USD lights as well. That's why you see the word preview around. Um, but this is all the textures that were written out. So again, you see it does a nice job of it. This is basically turning off or changing the render context to Unreal. And so when I change it, there was obviously in Unreal, in this project, I had textures for those two, but everything else has got no texture. So then as far as an import goes, with this one, when it imports, it's going to also be bringing in the level sequences that are associated with this. So once it's imported, and I mean, it's important because in the past, when we were importing the stuff in, we were always putting everything in the content browser, which is, if you've got a shot laid out with characters moving around in a camera, obviously you want it to be all set up there. And so here, if I go into the level sequences, then I can actually open up the level sequence and scrub around in the sequencer. So yeah, so you can see all the characters are brought in, their animation, different with the skeletal mesh and whatnot. Yeah. And that's the camera that would have been imported, because cameras don't live in the content browser. So when it brings in the camera, it's going to bring it in the outliner, and then those are the level sequences that were there. So now I can do whatever I want to it in Unreal. I've got full access to everything now. That's it. Yeah. Okay, so then there's USD in Unreal. So now we're talking like using using USD kind of natively, where I'm going to load a USD file and I'm going to interact with it in Unreal. Now, there's obviously, we don't support everything, and as we progress with our development, we are adding more support for stuff. But at this point, you can loading the USD file, you can deal with things like purpose, render context. It's multi-threaded when it's loading that stage, so it's trying to load it as fast as it can. You can interact with assets. You can animate, so you can do transform animation on anything. There's layer support. People always ask that. It's like, yep, you can have all the layers that you want. You can choose what layer you want to target for your edits. In 5.1, we've added some new functionality. So there's live link driving USD. So let's say you're on a mocap stage or you're using Maya, you can open up a USD file in Unreal, and you can either have live link, like let's say I said from mocap driving the USD scale, or you can have live link driving it. The caveat at this point is that we haven't written the part for saving the data into Unreal. So this is all like super experimental stuff. So but you can do it at this point. And then the other thing that we've added is control rig driving USD scale. This is actually really interesting because I can open up a USD file, I can select a character, I can add a control rig to it, and now I'm animating in Unreal. And so whether it's an FK control rig or like a control rig that has FK, IK, and all that, but I can be changing the motion on it, and then as soon as I hit save, it pushes the information into the USD file. So then, yeah, so we have asset cache. There's a texture cache, which I talk about in a minute. We support UDIMs and virtual texturing, so all that stuff supported. Also Python support. So if you're needing to do stuff on your own, there's full support for the Python API, for the Python USD API. So this is a simple example of, this is a character in Unreal. So it's like from Paragon, an older game. And then this is the same thing that's been exported, and now this is USD. Okay, so full USD. And if you're like, oh, for whatever reason you didn't like the camera, the USD structure is very, very simple. I would structure the USD a little bit differently, but right now, if you look, it says steelaction.usda, and there's a little check mark beside it under the edit column on the far right. That means that any edits that happen, we're going to go on that layer. And so basically, when you have a USD file that you've loaded in the USD stage, you can, when you click on it in the outliner and look in the details panel, there'll be a level sequence associated with it. So whenever there's animation, there's always going to be a level sequence associated with it. So when you open up that level sequence, it's going to show the character, camera, etc. So all I'm doing here is going in and deciding that I want to change the camera. So I'm going to go in here. I've got full access to all the curves. I'm just going to delete them, and then I can animate the camera. So as I'm animating the camera, when I'm putting down keyframes, it's basically getting baked under the hood into the camera that's in the USD. So again, this is all happening in USD, just really slowly. And you can also, like as you can see here, you've got access to things like the focus of the depth of focus and stuff. So you can be animating that as well, and that all gets written back out to the USD file. So this would be, if let's say I'm working in a shot pipeline, there's a bunch of different shots. I'm able to open up a USD file into Unreal. I can, take a look at it. I can make edits to it, and then I can save them, directly back out. Obviously, if you've got a pipeline, you're going to want, to be able to version, if you're making changes to the camera, you don't want to just write over it directly, but you can then add whatever layers you want in there, and then push the animation or edits to that particular layer. So this is an example. This is looking at sort of the control rig driving. So all this is USD scale, or sorry, all this is USD that's been loaded in, and these are characters that we're selecting, and you're just saying use FK, or sorry, use control rig, and all we're doing here is saying make it FK, right? I just want to adjust some joints. And then again, you're just going in and you now have access to the the curve data on a per joint basis, because that's how the data is saved. So once you have access to that, then you can edit it however you want. And then as we're making those edits, on the USD stage, those edits are all going to whatever layer is set to edit. And so you can see it's, you're just doing FK animation on this guy. And then as we move forward on this, hang on. Okay, so if we grab this guy and we set up a control rig, he actually has a full control rig. So we're adding the animation controls control rig on this character. So now we can go in and start using IK and whatever other controls are in there for moving the character. And again, as we're making these edits, they're all ending up on the USD stage. And so it's just a matter of saving the USD file, and it will save the edits. So as you make more changes, and then we go, yeah, so here it's just a matter of, that's like file save, and now if we want to, we can reopen it. And then when we reopen it, there's no rigs on them anymore, but you can add the rigs again, if that's what you need to do. But you can see the animation is there now. So then the last thing that we'll take a look at here, this is really proof of concept, type of stuff. So what we're looking at here is it's a very specific USD setup, where you've got multiple shots. Each shot is pulling in the same contents, file, and then there's a couple of layers. So you have an anim layer and a layout layer. And what we're doing here, and why I say it's very proof of concept, is if you were doing this and you had like really big USD files, then this would be very painful because we're actually loading in 3 separate USD stage actors, and we're taking each USD stage actor and we're adding it to the sequencer. And when you scrub through, when you go from one USD stage actor to the next, it has to load the stage actors as it's going through. So the stage actors don't know anything about the other stage actors at this point. And so again, that's why I say this is more proof of concept, but it's more to sort of go, look, this is the sorts of things that you can do, and it's all USD, right? So I can have the different USD files in the sequencer and have them separated out. You put a visibility track in there so that you're hiding the USD stage actor from shot to shot so that they're not there. You also have to put a timer like on the USD stage so that it knows to play back when it's being scrubbed. But once you've done that, now you can go to an individual stage, like an individual shot in the sequencer, and you can start to do edits. You can move stuff around. You can add animation. So if you think of it like I've got 10 shots, I can bring all the shots in, line them up in the sequencer, and now I have access to go in and, depending on which edit layers I've created, I can choose my edit layers, and then it's just a matter of making, moving stuff around, changing things, and then saving the appropriate USD stage, and then that data is getting, written out. And so one of the reasons why we're looking at this is, for me, I want to be able to work on all the shots, right? Like I want to be able to load the movie, and then I want to be able to decide what I want to see in the movie, whether I want to look at a scene, whether I want to look at a shot. And so when we're looking at this, we're kind of going, okay, well, we definitely want to be able to look, here's my show, here's my scenes, here's my shots, and then be able to have them show up appropriately in the sequencer, and then give people the ability to dive into a shot, make whatever edits that you want to make, whatever changes you want to make, and then save them out to the individual shots. And we're doing some interesting stuff structure-wise here because we're going in and saying, here's a level sequence that represents the camera and only the camera. So that when we write it out, we can say, write out this level sequence to the shot as USD. And so we're only getting the camera written out, right? So so far, I think it works well. We're obviously need to do some optimizations to make it start to get really slick. But it's depending or given the right structure of USD and given the ability to drop them in correctly, you can get a really powerful workflow out of this. Oh, and then just some of the stuff is Python. It's really the level exporter is the main thing that's Python. But if you're trying to do any Python work, using it, these are some good things to take a look at and see, what we're looking at and calling. What we've been trying to do is a lot of the functionality we're trying to get out, it's got to be written in C++. So like foliage or landscapes, we need to get the C++ portion in there so that we can actually write it out to USD. But once we can do that, then it makes it available to Python. So yeah, so these are the things we covered today. Hopefully you guys saw one thing that was new to you. And then I'd say thanks and questions. My questions, if you have questions, can you can you structure them so that it's a yes or no answer?